Hello. Welcome. My name is Reese, and today we are going to chat about how to use coherent pluralism. But first, a reminder that this content is brought to you by Roote, which has a beautiful thing called the Roote Fellowship, a community of world-class systems thinkers looking to understand and build the future. So if you are excited by systems thinking and coherent pluralism and what we discussed today, check us out at roote.co. And again, before I begin, whoever you are in the world, I hope you're doing well. Love to you and your people. Today is about coherent pluralism, and specifically this final piece, which is how to use coherent pluralism. We already talked about what it is and why it's important, and then how these different movements are embodying it. Today we're chatting about actually using it. And today is going to feel a bit like a self-development, self-help thing, but I'm going to try to concentrate entirely on things that are coherently plural. So, in order to do that, we're going to chat about language. We're going to chat about being pluralistic and curious with yourself, then with others and empathizing, then with ideas and being a rationalist, and then also some moves that you can make to create coherence after you are pluralistic and being super pluralistic. And then finally, we'll chat about how coherent pluralism connects to the Roote system more generally. So it's really today's a lot about language and this mindset of how to be curious with respect to, the world. Okay, let's start with language. We're going to chat about emotive conjugation, binaries versus gradients, and these paradox phrases. And these are all aspects of language that show coherent pluralism. So this first one is called emotive conjugation, and it's when there's some underlying truth that you can then spin positively or negatively. And this is also sometimes called a Russell conjugation from Bertrand Russell. And so the idea here is, if you change your mind on something, a positive way to spin that is to say, I have reconsidered the matter. But if someone else changes your mind, you say, wait a second, you've gone back on your word. So it's a negative version. You can do this as well with something like, hey, I have a unique perspective on the world versus you are crazy. So being able to hear those positive or negative switches. And again, this is very connected to some of the stuff we chatted about in the first week's videos on the symbolic and the real, and how there's some real substrate underlying here, which is my mind was changed. And then there's a symbolic level, which is how do you talk about that change? And you can either make it a positive thing or a negative thing. As some other examples here, the classic one is global warming versus climate change versus climate crisis. And this came up, it was global warming, but then some conservative think tanks really pushed this idea of calling it climate change. Instead of, it's not, the globe is not warm. It's just things are changing. The climate is just changing. Everybody changes. And now with folks like Greta, it's like, no, this is a climate crisis, people. Call it what it is. Other funny examples, there's this, or funny or not funny, estate tax versus death tax. Estate tax is when they're both talking about the same thing, which is when someone dies, what should you do with their estate or bonus money? But one sounds good. Oh, take the money from the estate tax. One is like a tax for your death? That's not right. Another example, illegal aliens versus undocumented immigrants. It's like those people coming in versus, they're just these folks that don't have documents. Develop versus gentrify. If you move into a neighborhood or if they're building a bunch of new apartments in a neighborhood, well, they're gentrifying that neighborhood or they're developing it. Both are true. Appreciate versus appropriate. If I am listening to some, the new Danny Brown rap album or some, old African-American hymn, I am appreciating it in a lovely way, and I'm also kind of appropriating it. I'm taking it within my, white cultural lens. And then this example from meditation, judgment versus discernment, where judgment's kind of this negative form of, oh, you're judging yourself and others and your feelings and putting in things into right and wrong buckets, versus discernment, which is, you're being discerning around, differentiating things. You're not judging. You can also do emotive conjugation with acronyms. So there's one in the United States called the Patriot Act after 9/11, where this was a way to essentially surveil people and keep America safe, and they called it the Patriot Act. So that's a good thing. Another example, you can take this is less not emotions, but again is using words to mess with things, and you can do active versus passive verbs, where if you make a mistake, and this happened with a U.S. president, I think this was maybe Watergate, where afterwards they said, mistakes were made. Who made them? But you're like, oh, mistakes, they were made, versus we made mistakes, or you made the mistake. So these are all forms and ways to take the real and to use symbols, to use language to kind of mess with the true, with how people perceive of the meaning. This happens a lot in relationships too, where, if I'm in a relationship with some woman or something and I say, oh, you are a bad listener who never understands me, versus, well, you didn't get my meaning recently. And you can tell that, once you get these adverbs of frequency, where like always or never, if I say, you are a bad listener, I'm saying their identity is bad and you never understand me. Versus, well, you sometimes understand me, you occasionally understand me. You can use something like that. And those things change the emotive, tones here, positive or negative. This happens a lot on the internet, where, especially on Wikipedia, where people are trying to determine how to talk about a thing. With the killing of George Floyd recently, there was a lot of debate in the Wikipedia editors. What should we call the title of the Wikipedia page? The death of George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. And all of those things are, symbolic references to the real, which is what we saw with the video. And how should we use emotive conjugation to kind of make it more positive or negative, or more directly connect to what really happened? This happens all the time in politics, emotive conjugation. Trump is a master at it. He calls, there's phony Kamala and slow Joe. And these are pretty direct, just emotive conjugations where you're just adding an adjective in front that has a negative connotation, and then you're connecting it to their name. And you can do the same thing with Trump, where you say, oh, it's crazy Trump. And at the same time, it's, the positive version would be authentic Trump. The people who get him, really, he says it like it is. He's just being his authentic self. So that is all very connected. These emotive conjugations are very powerful, and you should be looking out for them when you read things or when you use your own language. And it's very connected to this idea of, binaries versus a gradient. A binary is when you say something is either all wrong or all right. And a gradient is where you kind of say, well, there's a little bit of, yes and no here. So for example, with an emotive conjugation of develop versus exploit, where you can talk about what the United States of America did to the Western United States when they were trying to get all of those frontier atoms and turn them into factories and make money from them. And you could either call that developing, they developed the land, or you call it exploiting, they exploited the land. And these are two kind of binaries on the similar subject. The exploiting is true. There's this trail of tears where we displaced, tens of thousands of people, of Native American folks, and it was very awful and horrible, and then we did bad things to the land, and we took the land. It wasn't our land to start with. And there's also some truth to the developed perspective, which is, we created amazing, great things on the land as well, some of which were not already there. And so when you have a situation like this, you can use a slash to denote that there's a binary or gradient here. You can say, we developed / exploited the land. I appreciated / appropriated that music. We're talking about, climate change / the climate crisis is very scary. So being able to use the / as a way to show that you could either make it a positive or negative form here. And what all of this is about and what gradients are about is being in a relationship to the relationship. There is a real reality with developing and exploiting the frontier. And there's truth to the developing and there's truth to the exploiting. And that relationship between developing and exploiting, we should just be in relationship to that. And so the slash and the gradient perspective is a way to be in relationship with, this kind of a tough balance. And you can use a bunch of great terms here to talk about it. You can say, yeah, I'm in a relationship to this concept, this complex topic. Or maybe I'm in a dance, with this thing. There's a tension here. There's a balance. There's a dialectic, an ongoing back and forth. You're getting more texture. You're taking a non-dualist perspective. It's not just either or. It's, a little bit of both. There's a paradox here. Really starting to think of, when you see something like this, to kind of see it as a dance and see it as a process instead of saying two right sides or a right side and a wrong side. And I really love dance, by the way. Dance is just a great way to say, oh, yeah, you can kind of dance with the difficult ideas. Versus, if you say, oh, there's a binary here, and there's a contradiction, this is a debate, this is a dichotomy. Those things show stuff as, 0 and 1, as us versus them. And sometimes it can be true that it is a contradiction or that a debate is actually happening, but being aware of how these terms really frame it as that us versus them dynamic. And this is connected to these paradox-based phrases. So just like you can say a verb like exploit/develop, you can kind of push two words that mean the opposite things, that are on opposite sides of a balance, opposite sides of a dance, and you can push them into one word, one phrase, which in theory means nothing, but actually is very juicy. So something like coherent pluralism is an example of this. How can you be both coherent and plural at the same time? That doesn't make any sense. Or this example that I love, Libertarian Paternalism. The idea behind that is, you can think about our sense-making ecosystem and how there's good and bad info. And a libertarian paternalist perspective would say, yes, let's be libertarian and allow people to consume whatever info and to go to whatever websites they want. But let's also be kind of paternalistic, which means to be kind of parenty, to be kind of, to treat them from a position of power and to kind of nudge them towards a good thing. So, to make the graph from something on the right to something on the left, meaning to actually provide good info. We shouldn't be so libertarian that we just say, whatever happens on the internet happens. If people are sharing fake news and inciting people to violence all the time, whatever, we don't need to do that. So this libertarian paternalist perspective says, yeah, let's nudge people towards good info while also allowing them to make their own choices. So this is an example of a paradox-based phrase where you can combine two opposites and combine them together to make them actually mean something meaningful, to say, hey, we're in relationship to this relationship. This is very connected, and the language piece in general is connected to systems thinking in Buddhism. And I just want to highlight some quotes here. The first is one that we chatted about with Donella Meadows before about paradigms. And she says, it is to get, when you really get paradigms, she says, it is to get at a gut level the paradigm that there are paradigms, and to see that itself is a paradigm, and to regard the whole realization as devastatingly funny, is to let go into not knowing, into what the Buddhists call enlightenment. So yeah, she's saying, being in relationship to the relationship, being into the paradigm that there are paradigms, that's okay, that's good. In a Buddhist perspective, I love this great answer, just an internet answer from someone about, do Buddhists fall in love? And there's this perspective of Vajrayana Buddhism, which provides this really nice multi-perspective, coherently plural mindset around this. And, this person answers, well, can we fall in love? And this person says, in Vajrayana, we are trained to see things from all sides at the same time. So the Vajrayana view includes both the sacred and illusory aspects of love. Love love is both sacred and a giant trick as far as Vajrayana is concerned. Vajrayana would still appreciate the inherent fakeness of love, the mechanical nature of which comes from a match of a partner's stereotypes and preconceptions. And so even if a Vajrayana practitioner could play with the fire of love, both in context of its ego melting properties and as well as for pleasure, they would not take it so one-sidedly as an untrained run-of-the-mill person would do. This is great. This is saying, hey, is there love? Is it real? Oh, it's like both are true. Yes, it's an illusion. Yes, it's totally, random and just whatever. And it is sacred and it's this beautiful thing. And so this, complex version of Buddhism allows you to take that yes and or both and perspective towards this. Cool. So that is how to be coherently plural with your language, to be aware of emotive conjugation, to really see things as binaries versus gradients, and to think about those slashes, and to use these paradox phrases to try to combine two opposites to get at this idea that this coherently plural idea that you're getting at, to be in relationship to the relationship. Really what it feels like is to take a yes and a both and perspective. Okay. So what does coherently plural language feel like in your body? Good. Obviously, I'm into it. I'm also a bit worried that it can lead to both sides-ism, where you just say, is this right? Is this wrong? It's like, well, both are true. It's like, well, no, the person killed a child or whatever. It's like, that's not right. And I'm also excited about the just language and how we can write it with these slashes and change our words here to really engage with it. And I do think some of the kinesthetic things, this dance, saying, you're in a relationship, you're in this dance with this interesting paradox. That's cool, Okay, interactive time. Think of either a political issue like abortion or a recent personal interaction like a fight you got in with someone, and try to use emotive conjugation to describe it negatively or positively. Second question, do you think that love is sacred or is it an illusion? Maybe it's both. Okay, now let's chat about pluralism with yourself. So the main way that I understand this is through these better and worse and then superpower shadow dynamics. So let's explain what I mean by that. Better is worse is this idea that if you're good at something, you'll be bad at something else. So for example, for me, I love listening. I really love listening and asking people questions. That's great. That's better. Good job, Reese. But what that means is that people often don't know what I think, which is worse. That's bad. And so it's good. I have this better thing that I'm a listener and a question asker, but it's bad because then people don't know where I'm at because I have spent all the time asking them questions. Or you could flip it and say, worse is better, where if you're bad at something, it makes you good at something else. So for example, I can sometimes not be as confident or as assertive, which is not a great thing, but it means that I listen more, which is a good thing. This worse is better or better is worse idea comes in with business as well. So there's this thing called the innovator's dilemma, and the idea, or in this is also called disruption theory, and with someone like Blockbuster, they had better. They had a good situation, which is, wow, they had so many stores around the world, around the countries, and they had all these physical locations. And they were making a lot of money from their current income of selling DVDs or renting DVDs, and that was good. That was better. But the worst side of it is that they ignored aspects of the internet, and then they just got totally beaten by Netflix because Netflix was internet first. And so this happens a lot in businesses where someone who's already good, they have customers making lots of income, they then miss these other new things because they're already making so much money off their first thing. So like they're not even going to check out this other new thing that could disrupt them, but they just ignore it. So that's the better is worse dynamic. Their goodness leads to badness. You can apply this better is worse to people and to think of these things as superpower and shadow dynamics. So for me, my superpower of listening and being curious is awesome. That's a superpower, woohoo. And my shadow is that people don't know what I think as much. So I have tons of these. I'm very abstract, and so I'm not very concrete. And so lots and lots of these come up for me, and so understanding them for yourself can be very powerful. This is all part of this progression that we're all on to empathize with our personal selves, to understand how we were built in childhood, how we are socialized, and to understand our superpower and shadow dynamics. And you can do this in a variety of ways. And one of the best ways is therapy. Therapy allows you to look at your life. This is just a little graph of your life, and each row is a week in the year, 52 weeks per year with these little boxes, and and you go down, and it goes by age, so age 0, age 1. And what therapy is like is looking at your past and seeing these formative moments and being like, whoa, that's how I knew. For me, for example, I knew that I was that I was too curious when one of my middle school/high school girlfriends said to me, hey, Reese, you're not okay enough with silence. And I was like, whoa, you're right. That is one of my superpower shadow dynamics. I am way too curious, and so I'm not okay enough with silence, and that's not great. So do therapy to understand these formative moments in your past. Okay, so what does personal coherent pluralism feel like in your body? What do these superpower shadow dynamics feel like? Powerful. I've just experienced amazing impacts of these in my own life. One thing that's especially curious about them is that the shadow, we spend a lot of time on the shadow and making myself a better, making myself express my own opinions more. That's good, to work on my shadows. But an almost scarier part is to really emphasize your superpowers, to really see the things you're amazing and good at, and to share them with the world. That's hard, but is cool. Okay, interactive time. What is one of your superpower shadow dynamics? And what were the formative moments in your childhood? And again, this superpower shadow thing is a coherently plural thing. It's a way to be in relationship to a relationship. I'm not just a curious person. I'm not just a person who's bad at sharing my opinions. No, I have this relationship between those two things, and I should be in relationship to that relationship. Great. Let's chat about being curious and plural with others, aka empathy. So I want to give 3 examples here that are powerful for me. Empathizing with the global poor, with the other side, with the people on the other side, the other political side, and then just with some other folks. I want to give one other example of folks dissimilar to me. And as a note here, I would love to empathize with everybody here, but I just want to give 3 quick examples. Okay, empathy with the global poor. This one's intense but crucial. So I love this graph from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation where they show, for someone like them, all the hurdles that they had to go over or didn't have to go over. and they break them into these buckets. So for someone like Bill up top, it's like, geography. Did he have good or bad geography? His demographics, was he white or, a male or whatever? Were there shocks to his life, like natural disasters? What about his socioeconomic status, like his income and his education? And what about governance? Like, what was it like to grow up in America for him? And obviously for someone like Bill, not that many hills to get over, Rich white dude, grew up, went to college, whatever, like no climate change. He's fine. So of course, like he think he was it was easier to be successful for him. He obviously worked hard, but it was easier to be successful. And then with Melinda Gates, for her, there was a hump with gender where it's like, yeah, the society is quote unquote worse towards women. And that was hard almost certainly for her and is an issue. And so she, in general, things were easier for her. She was still a, rich white person growing up in America without climate change, but there was still some difficulty. And versus, this girl born in the Sahel, which I believe is a place in Western Africa, and it is, all the difficulty for her growing up. Wow. Her geography and I think it's like very deserty, the land there. She's a woman from who's with a difficult, I think the race that they're talking about. I mean, a woman who's, what society, like an African woman and, with lots of climate change and conflict where she's at, with, growing up really poor without much education or access to services, with a difficult government. It's really hard for her to start a company like Microsoft, which is really sad. There's so much opportunity lost in the world these days because 750 million people are still growing up in extreme poverty. Another great piece from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is these videos they have of living on $2 a day. I think that the graph that we just saw is very helpful, but these videos were very helpful for me in just trying to understand what it's like to live on $2 a day. Because it's really hard. And there's also many different ways that it manifests itself. Now let's chat about the other side. And this one is one where, if the global poor, that's more of a thing of, like, we don't think about that. That's not very connected to us. The other side is so therefore we don't empathize with it, versus the other side, which is one where it is very connected to us. We're battling them in the political world, and we kind of demonize them or think of them as lesser. And so we can try to empathize and really be pluralistic with not only our own experience of the world, but their experience. And so to do that with the other side, I really like this book called Strangers in Their Own Land by Arlie Russell Hochschild. I probably said that wrong. And it was she's an anthropologist who goes around the United States of America and tries to understand why they think the way they think and what their lives are like. And there's a lot. It's sad, There's this just picture of this guy here, and he has a version of his what they call the deep story. What Hochschild calls the deep story, which is for this guy. He's thinking like, hey, I'm working my hardest here, and I'm doing my best. And what's happening is I'm in line to kind of, when everybody's in line, any hard worker is in line. And what's happening, but life's kind of passing me by, People are moving to cities, agriculture's moving out, the job that I had at the machine factory's moving away. Damn, religion is changing. And so, and as I'm waiting in line, still doing my best though, because I'm just trying to do my best, these other people, women and African Americans and other folks that are, getting affirmative action, they're just hopping in front of me in line. And it's like, wait a second. Everybody should just try their best, get their place in line, and that's what you got to do. And I've been working my best, and things are still hard for me. I'm still losing my job. And you can't be cutting. So I think understanding this deep story is and this is not perfect, but this is a way to empathize with folks. Another great example for me with the other side is, people are just born into different realities. And one of those are these extreme groups. So we've already talked about Megan Phelps Roper and how she was born into this extreme, religious right group, the Westboro Baptist Church. And it was really hard for her to get out of that cult. And then this guy on the right, Derek Black, who is a godson of this guy, David Duke, who is the head of the Ku Klux Klan. And so this guy, Derek Black is the kid on the right. He was born into this. He was born into this really intense white nationalist world. And eventually, through college and lots of patience and lots of difficulty, he escaped. And these folks, they're smart. Like when you listen to them, they're really, really smart. And they were just, when they're built into this bad world of extremism, that's what they believe in. They're smart in that own world. And then it takes a lot of difficult emotional work to help them escape. And someone like Derek, I like this quote from him when he eventually left, where he said, "When I condemned white nationalism, it was not that I was stepping out to be welcomed or heralded. It really felt like stepping out into a void, but it was just the only choice that felt morally correct." So this is a kid. I mean, when he left, when he spoke out against it, he was definitely early 20s, like 22. And when he condemned it, it wasn't like he was doing it for praise. It was just like, hey, everything that I've been born and raised is like this, and I'm going to get totally, ostracized by my family, but I think this is the right thing to do, so I hope so. And then just stepping out into the void. Whew. Yeah, so we are all socialized and have our own programming. Another great way to understand the other side is through this moral foundations theory by this guy, Jonathan Haidt, in this book, The Righteous Mind. And the rough idea is that, liberal folks are more into autonomy-based things, like, making sure that individuals, there's no pain for them, that they're being cared for, that things are fair, and that people are free and have liberty, versus conservatives, which are more about these community values, these groupishness values, something like loyalty or authority or sanctity, where you think about, the greater good in a way, and you say, hey, let's make sure that we treat that thing with loyalty and defer to authority. And I think that this is a helpful perspective, because then you can see, someone on the right might have sanctity towards religion or God, and I don't really get that, but I do get something like sanctity towards nature, and thinking that, it's bad if someone just poops all over nature. That's doesn't feel, right. So this is a great way to start to understand their perspective. And also a reminder at this that, this is just, it's this question of revolution versus evolution. On the left, progressives think, we should change more quickly. While on the right, conservatives think, well, we should change more slowly. And the thing is, neither of them is right? We should think about change. They both agree on that. And how fast or slow? Well, I'm not sure. There's no right answer here. And the other key idea for me here was that, conservatism is correlated with low openness to experience. Openness to experience is one of these big 5 personality traits that psychologists use to understand people. And openness to experience is kind of like curiosity. And you can see why someone like me, I was born and was, nurtured into high openness to experience, super curious. Well, that's why I moved to a city, because there's all kinds of random stuff here that matters to me, versus someone with low openness to experience. They're going to be in a more rural place, and that makes sense. And, researchers, they estimate that, a third to 50%, 33 to 50% of political attitudes are genetically determined. And so you think about, all of our personality traits that are, partially genetically determined. And then you think that some of those personality traits are connected then to our political views. And it's like, should I really demonize someone from the other side for being less curious than me, especially if a lot of that curiosity was just in their genes? It's like, I don't know. That doesn't seem right. Cool. So those things all help me empathize with the other side. Finally, I want to note another one here of just folks who grew up poor, or especially the example here for me will be with just like, poorer black folks in America. And there's this beautiful song that I want to share called Torture by Danny Brown. And Danny Brown's a rapper that grew up in Detroit who had a tough childhood and, was a drug dealer and things like that. And I find some of these musical pieces to be especially powerful for me to touch empathy. And you might have your other ways, but music for me is a great way to empathize. So I'm just going to read in a kind of a weird way from this Danny Brown song, Torture. And this song is all about what it was like for him to grow up and how that was really painful for him, how it was really torture for him. And he says, "Seen another dope fiend beat another with a hammer." That's a drug person, a person on crack, beating another one with a hammer. "Remember at the park, seen a ninja at a payphone, got rocked in his dome, got shot in the head, and then his mama picked me up and ran home. Was like effing 7 years old when I first seen a fiend try to light a rock off the stove, damn near burned his top lip off. Yeah, so my mind ticked off, desensitized to a lot of things. My mind would drift off, which is what I wish these are things that I would see on TV. I snapped out of it and see my uncle beating on my auntie. Gunshots outside was sort of like fireworks, but we know they ain't fireworks because it's December 21st. Man, cold winter with the kerosene heater on the couch so cold you can't take off your sneakers. And this is hard. This is so much harder than my childhood. The amount of intense, drug use in my childhood, low. The amount of times I saw people hurt with hammers or with guns in my childhood, very low. And so for Danny, he says, yeah, and it's torture. I look in my mind and I see these horrors. All the stuff that I've seen, it's torture. That's what this song is all about, is just, for him, if we think from those formative moments in his childhood, a lot of really difficult ones. And for this, plus the other side one, plus the global poor, they all just remind me that, hurt people can hurt people. And that childhood has a huge impact on folks, and how you're socialized has a huge impact on folks. And that, if you're this person that's kind of looking at the world all mean, you see the anger beneath it. But beneath the anger is this sadness, this unmet need, and this feeling of sadness. And beneath the sadness is this little boy crying in the corner. Someone who was ignored as a child, or who had a tough moment. So we see the anger, and we want to just go directly to that perception and to respond with anger, or to respond with, what are you doing? But to go deeper and deeper and to try to get to this childhood level, I think is very powerful. So what does empathy with others feel like in your body? I feel grateful for my childhood and my parents and being born around this time and not 200 years ago. And being in America and being white and being a male, that's all. If you look at my graph of humps like Bill Gates's, it's like there's not much difficulty for me. So that privilege, I'm just very grateful for it. And I'm also so sad for those other folks who have had more difficult childhoods. And I'm also hopeful. Or one note on the sadness before the hope is, I had an experience recently where I was driving home and I was listening to a radio show about talking about immigration at the border of US and Mexico, and how it's so tough for these people to have these, undocumented immigrants / illegal aliens trying to come across the border and to have their families, their children taken from them. And I was just crying in the car. Because it's so sad. And the hope with Roote, and with the hope that what I'm trying to do here is just be helpful as possible. And what that means is seeing this as a huge opportunity. That when hurt people, yes, true. But loved people also love people. And that people can deprogram themselves, can, transition to new childhoods or understand their childhood better. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can empathize with others to help them progress and develop, and that in the future we'll have an amazing situation where more people have better childhoods and have better relationships to their childhood, and that there's less poverty and racism and those things in the world. Okay, interactive time. Think of someone you really dislike. Try to understand and love them. This is a form of meditation called meta meditation, I believe, aka loving kindness meditation, where you try to love yourself, you try to love the people around you, you try to love the people, neutral people, but then you also try to love people that you kind of don't like, that you kind of hate. And so think of someone you really dislike and try to love them. Second, think of the full experiential space-time of your life thus far and imagine that for someone else. So by experiential space-time, I mean, wow, all the experiences you've had as a person. It's so many. For me, I'm 29 years old. I've had a lot of stuff happen in my life. Wow, cool. What about someone else? They've had so much happen too. Try to really empathize and understand what that must be for someone else. There's so much life out there. Okay, let us now chat about pluralism with ideas. So not with people, but trying to understand other ideas, and specifically talking about rationalism. So we chatted about this a bit in our last episode around straw manning versus steel manning. The straw man is where you hear someone's argument and you say, oh, you're trying to say that saving babies is bad, or whatever, versus steel manning where you say, oh, you're just saying this, which is super reasonable. Is that right? And that is very connected to this whole, group at the CFAR, the Center for Applied Rationality. And I want to highlight another, piece of ideas here and a way to kind of think about steel manning, which is called the ideological Turing test. And the idea with that is there's this thing called a Turing test where you give it to a computer, and the test is you ask the computer, hey, computer, you're trying to you're typing stuff to the computer and you're seeing if you can determine whether it's a computer or whether it's a human. So you type to your little, chat bot or whatever, you say, tell me what is love like, or how old are you, or what do you think about the political environment? And you try to then see, oh, is this person, am I talking to a human or am I talking to a computer? And the computer fails the test if it does not pretend like it's a computer. So that's the idea behind a Turing test. And you can do this, though, with ideologies as well, where you say, you are trying to pretend, instead of the computer trying to pretend it's human, you try to pretend to be of an ideology and try to get it so well that a person in that world would say, yeah, that's totally it. You are pretending like you are a libertarian. And so you can do this with, it's kind of a form of empathy. Empathy is where you understand all their past experiences and that kind of stuff. But this is more with ideologies where you're saying, where you're saying, okay, if I'm pretending to be an effective altruist, what do those people believe? If I'm trying to be a game B person, what do they believe? If I'm trying to be a Republican or Democrat, what do they believe? And this often shows up when with this Republican versus Democrat or political parties thing, where people say, oh, what you believe is blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, you should try to take their ideology so deeply that you could actually pretend to be one of them. That's how you know you really get it. Okay. What does rationalism and this ideological Turing test, what does it feel like in your body? I'm not totally sure. It feels a bit... There's kind of there's like an excitement or a coolness there of like, ooh, trying to pretend like you can chameleon to be a certain thing. That's exciting. Yeah, I think that's mostly where I'm at. Okay. Interactive time. Try to do an ideological Turing test with what you see as your opposing political party. Okay, step 5 here. Moves for coherence. These are ways, we've been talking a lot about pluralism and a way to, try to be curious and to get more perspectives in. And that's great, but you can also occasionally do these moves. You got to be coherent too. And so as an example, one example is shared outcomes. This is a nice and easy example of a way to say, we see differently, but let's create some coherence. We have a shared outcome. We want the same thing. So I gave the example earlier of progressives versus conservatives. And it's like, wait a second, the progressives are saying we should change quickly. The conservatives are saying we should change slowly. They believe totally different things. Well, actually, they have the shared outcome, which is, we should think about change, how fast and how slow it is. And that's cool. That's cool that you have that shared outcome and that shared interest in this. I like shared outcomes. There's this great piece from Wait But Why called The Sick Giant. And you can think of a shared outcome as this box over here. That's number 2, what should be. And that's different than number 1, which is what is, right? There's like, what's the current status quo? Number 2 is like, well, what should be? Where are we going? And then number 3 is like, well, how do we get there? And those are all places where you could agree or disagree with folks. And the cool thing is that in society, we agree a lot on what should be. So this is from Pew Research, a research thing where they asked Republicans and Democrats, the red and the blue, what they believe, and in general, or what they believe about what should be. And in general, they really agreed with each other. For example, it's a question of balance of power between government branches. Is that important for the country? And everybody agrees. A balance of power is great. And so the average difference between all these things is only 5 percentage points. People generally agree. This is roughly what we all want. We all have a shared outcome here. Versus what is. This is the same quote. This is a similar survey from Pew, but about describing the current state of the country. And as you can tell, there's a lot more disagreement. This top one, Democrats, only 37% of them believe that everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed. Well, Republicans, 74% of them believe that. And so the difference here is more than 2x. It's, 12 percentage points is the average difference here. So people really disagree about what is true, but they agree about those shared outcomes, about what they want to be true. And I think that's exciting. You can also think of shared outcomes not only from the individual perspective, but you can think of it from this multi-scale way where you're like, what about from a company perspective, for example? Do they have shared outcomes? And yes, you can look at the mission of a company. And someone like Nike, their mission is to bring inspiration to every athlete. Cool. Adidas, another company, says, their mission is to build great equipment for every athlete. And it's like, well, they are competitors, deep competitors with each other, but they really do have this shared outcome of, to spread a love of sports and to help athletes. And so it's really cool and a kind of a mindset shift when instead of seeing yourself as a competitor with these people, you see them as someone who's co-evolving with you, someone who's, not competing, but co-opting, it's called co-opetition, where you're collaborating and competing, where you have this, it's good for Nike and for Adidas if more folks are into sports, so that's cool. So you can apply the shared outcome perspective to companies as well. Okay, now let's chat about a second way to gain coherence, which is this shared third story. This is from this book, Difficult Conversations. And the idea here is that if you're, discussing with a partner or something, this book is all about relationships. And so let's say I'm discussing with my partner and something real happened. There's their story of it, there's my story of it, and then there's what actually happened. And so trying to come to agreement around what actually happened is very important. That's the third story. So, from my perspective, maybe, if my partner, if she is being all dirty and stuff, I say, you are a slob, you're being a slob. And she might say, well, my story is I'm busy this month and I'm doing my best. And it's like, well, what's the shared third story? What can we both agree on here? And what we might be able to agree on is, well, we clearly have different cleanliness preferences. And, actual truth is that you haven't cleaned this week. We can all agree on that shared third story. And then once we have that shared third story, that reality, then we can kind of work on our own reactions to it, emotional reactions, etc. So this shared third story is just a helpful way to gain coherence with folks. Okay, what do these moves for coherence feel like in your body? I love the shared outcomes one. I'm a fanboy of that. I think it is crucial for all of us to look from that meta perspective, that general perspective, and to think about what we're going for, and to get excited about the things that we agree on, to see the other side, to see we disagree, but say, oh, what are you going for? Oh, great, we have this goal, or you have that goal. That's cool. I don't have that goal, but we do have this shared goal over here. Awesome. Let's go towards that. I think it's a powerful way to not only, the empathy is really powerful, but it still kind of paints them as other and is less exciting versus a shared outcome, which really is exciting and is kind of action oriented. Okay, interactive time. Think of somebody you disagree with. What do you agree with them on? Second, what is a shared outcome between, the company you work for, your company, and your competitor? Okay, number 6 here. The last one, coherent pluralism and the Roote system. This is where we're going to chat about how coherent pluralism relates to those other pillars. So we're going to chat about coherent pluralism and networkism, and then coherent pluralism and bentoism. So with networkism, the main idea here is that all mindsets are embodied are embodied by individuals and manifest in in institutions. And so this mindset, this emerging mindset of coherent pluralism will be manifest through Lessig-Stott and through markets and laws and norms and code. And so coherent pluralism, you can kind of see it in something with laws, where you have like a court system is a very coherently plural thing, where it has lots of pluralism down beneath at the local level, and then it gets up into coherence at the national level with these Supreme Court decisions. You can also see coherent pluralism with markets, where the markets, there's a great quote that I was trying to find that I couldn't find about how markets are less about efficiency and are more about creativity. That really what they do is they create this amazing playing field for all the creativity to erupt and then for stuff to succeed from that creativity. So yeah, there's so many of these like market maps where you're just like, wow, markets are an example of an amazingly pluralistic process that then has coherence around the things that make money. But let's talk about code and coherent pluralism with code. So here's an example of the individual being coherently plural, but the code itself not doing so. Where the code is just, look, there's a lot of info, some of it's bad, some of it's good, we're just going to show all of it to you, whatever. But the person's like trying their best to like search for the good stuff. And what we want is both. We want the person to be searching for the good stuff, but also for the code to have a lot of nudges that make it so that, I don't know, that the information ecosystem is good. And you can see some proto-examples of this, of these attempts at pluralism and good information ecosystems, with something like red feed, blue feed, which shows on the left, a liberal perspective, on the right, a conservative perspective. And this can kind of get you thinking in a more pluralistic way. You can also see it with these little nudges where, this is Donald Trump talking about something crazy, and he's saying, there's no way, zero, that mail-in ballots will be, anything less than substantially fraudulent, blah, 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 scam stuff. And so what Twitter did is they said, well, this is all false, essentially. And so what they did is they had this little button that said, well, get the facts about mail-in ballots. So this is a way for them to take this emotive conjugation that Donald Trump has, where there's this reality, and he's essentially being false with respect to that reality, and the symbols that he's using are also very emotive in this really intense way. Anything less, they will be robbed. He's being really intense, and the attempt of the code to say, well, let's actually try to get the facts about mail-in ballots. Another interesting example here is this idea about these parts of the internet, this like cozy web or this dark forest, where if you are yourself in the general internet, it can be kind of scary to express yourself fully because you might get hit by a mob, by an internet mob. Traditionally, we'd call it something like cancel culture or what have you. And so what we've seen is people starting to move towards the cozy web or the dark forests, which are these places in society, or these places on the web where people can, they're like these more intimate groups where people can truly engage with each other in a safer space, and then can actually learn and deprogram themselves. And, if I'm some white nationalist and I just go on Twitter and I say, I'm a white nationalist, I think white people are the best, well, then I'm going to get everybody being like, screw you, man. But if I am in a dark forest or cozy web place, then I'll say, I'm a white nationalist. And then maybe the people in my little, 10-person crew will be able to listen to me and to help me deprogram myself and grow. And in the most extreme example, those are some proto-examples, but, we can think more deeply or more ambitiously here and say, well, what will these protocols in the future look like for truth? How should we do? Obviously, Twitter, is not the right answer, but how should we aggregate information and produce truth and share it with each other? And similarly, how can we do with empathy? Like, what happens? Would it be cool if, once a week you had a call, with someone way across the world from you or someone very different from you, and you just tried to understand them? And then finally, these meta lenses, how can we make sure that, people are programming themselves, deprogramming themselves and being aware of all their lenses? So you can embody coherent pluralism in code itself. Now let's chat about coherent pluralism and bentoism. And the main thing I want to say here is that bentoism is an example of coherent pluralism. And what we mean by that is, bentoism doesn't just say, oh, don't always just care about yourself, like, care about whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's like, no, it's a simple 2x2, so there's pluralism there, but it's very coherent. It's a very coherent 2x2 that says, you should care about your now me, but also your future me, also future us, and now us. Be pluralistic and care about those things and holistic, but don't be like, I can't make any decisions. I don't know, like, if now that I can't just care about myself, who should I even care about? It's like, no, you can have the coherence and the pluralism. Okay, what does coherent pluralism manifested in code feel like in your body? I guess I'm in an excited mood. I feel excited. I think that there could be so many beautiful ways that the internet can and has already helped us empathize and search for truth and, deprogram ourselves. I think there's so much opportunity there. And we're not there yet, but we'll get there. Okay, interactive time. Quick quiz. How is bentoism an example of coherent pluralism? Second question. Try to brainstorm some examples of how our sense-making could be more coherently plural. Great. So that is what we chat about today. A lot about language at the beginning, and then how to be pluralistic and curious about yourself, about others, and do it with ideas as well, and then how to create coherence sometimes, and then how coherent pluralism is connected to these other root system, the other parts of the root system. What will it feel like to integrate your learning, and what should you watch out for? You'll be very aware of your language. Your written and spoken language will start to change. You'll start to use some of these slashes, thinking more in terms of gradients. You'll start to really see as you start to read stuff, you'll start to, your own stuff will change, but then as you read things, wow, you'll see all this bias in the news and in politics. And then you'll also, loving empathy. I mean, I bet if you're already listening to this, I bet you're already here to some extent. And trying to be empathetic with folks and really leaning into that and loving that experience of trying to understand others. And you'll see yourself on your adult development journey, really trying to understand your own lenses. And as a warning, as you start to do that, you should watch out for the scary middle ground. One of which is, everything is a gradient and there is no truth, where you just, you're consuming things from the internet or you're talking to people and you're like, well, both sides, blah, blah. And it is, and you see all things as gradients without, really searching for and, thinking about the truth. And where you can get in this mode where you're just like, everything's a gradient and there is no truth, so whatever. So that's a scary place. The second thing to watch out for is, this scary middle ground where you, and this one's the scary one probably, where you reject your childhood identity, but you haven't really formed this new one yet. And you also don't have this healthy relationship to your past self. That's what, Derek Duke was talking about when he's talking about going into the void. That when you start to understand yourself and take a step back, wow, that can be very scary, especially when you haven't made the full transition yet. So keep going. So to conclude, this is what we chat about in the 3 sections. First, we chat about what is coherent pluralism and why is it important, and how it can be an important thing that if we think about for all humans, if all humans are good at, searching for truth and being empathetic and being meta with respect to their lenses, that would be really good. And we can, get adult development is part of the way to get there. We don't just have childhood development. We can develop as adults too. In the second piece, number B here, we chat about how a bunch of these modern movements embody coherent pluralism. That you can see it in Game B and in social justice activism and effective altruism and metamodernism, and that all these people are circling around similar ideas of, this gushy middle ground of being in relationship to a relationship. And finally, C, today we chatted about, language and empathy and how to be really pluralistic with respect to life, and then how to be relentlessly curious about things. And how you really manifest it in your own reality. So to conclude, I want to talk for a second about how coherent pluralism is part of this future positive vision. And why it's one of the 3 crucial root pillars. And I think that it's a big shift for society. Our networked information ecosystem is changing. Networkism is the new status quo, and so our information ecosystem is crazy. We all need to take responsibility and to really be coherently plural. And there's a beautiful future vision. And really, this is all about education, where from birth, people are brought up and they're socialized. But part of their socialization is this idea that, all parents mess up their kids. The only question is how much, and do you give them the tools to kind of escape from it and understand it? And so you can imagine these amazing future worlds where there's no poverty and there's no scarcity, and parents are parenting kids in this beautiful way, and they're socializing them but into these good realities. And as the kids grow up, we have these active rituals and processes that help us, deconstruct our lenses and understand where we came from. And then we start engaging with each other in this beautiful way where we have these new, socio-technical systems that are both where the code itself and where the humans combine to really elevate truth and to really elevate empathy and to elevate each other's lenses. And we're doing that, and we understand each other deeply, and we have a sense of what is true generally in the world. And we're also all okay with uncertainty, and that thing, that everybody doing that networked human organism has this deep sense of, that we have all of these amazing developed adults that can take on this crazy new world, and that we all together can, as mature people, that we can reckon with what we need to reckon with. That's going to be cool. It's going to be really cool when everybody is in this place and when all new people are developed as children and as adults into this new place. I am excited for that vision. So thank you for listening today. Thank you for watching. I hope that you're well. I hope to empathize with you. I hope you're doing okay on your own journey with being a coherently plural person. And again, if you're excited by this stuff, check out the Roote Fellowship and Roote.co. Goodbye.